It was nearly midnight when the knocking started. Sharp, desperate, and completely out of place in a house like his. Vincent Moretti, known across New York's underworld as Il Leone, was reviewing shipment reports in his study when the sound came again. 3 frantic knocks, followed by a small, trembling voice. "Please, someone help my mama." He froze. No one ever knocked on Vincent Moretti's door. Not neighbors, not strangers, not unless they had a death wish. When his head of security opened the door, a girl no older than 7 stood in the rain, barefoot, clutching a torn stuffed rabbit. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her coat soaked through. "They've beaten my mama," she whispered, voice breaking. "She's not moving, please. She's dying." For a moment, no one moved. His men exchanged uncertain looks. This was not the kind of emergency they were trained for. Vincent stood slowly, his expression unreadable. The girl's blue lips trembled as she met his eyes, unaware that she was speaking to one of the most feared men in the city. "Where's your mother?" he asked quietly. She pointed down the alley, her hand shaking. "By the dumpsters. They said she took something that wasn't hers, but she didn't. Please, mister." That single word, mister, cut through Vincent's usual cold detachment. He didn't hear fear in her voice, just pure desperate hope. He grabbed his coat, ignoring the questioning looks from his men. "Get the car," he ordered. "Now!" And in that moment, none of them could have guessed that this small, rain-soaked girl would drag their ruthless boss into a story that would break every rule he had ever lived by. Before we go further, take a second to hit that subscribe button. Every story here reminds us that one small choice can change everything. And trust me, you don't want to miss the next one. The knock on the heavy oak door echoed through the marble-floored hall of the Bellagio estate, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of New York City that belonged to Leonardo Moretti, one of the city's most feared and respected men. Inside, the warmth of a crackling fireplace contrasted the chill of the December night. Leonardo sat in his study, surrounded by mahogany shelves and the faint scent of Cuban cigars. He had just returned from a tense meeting with rival families, his mind still occupied with betrayal, loyalty, and blood debts. When his right-hand man, Marco, appeared in the doorway, his expression carried something Leonardo rarely saw in his men. Confusion. "Boss. There's a little girl at the gate. Says she needs help. Says her mama's dying." Leonardo raised an eyebrow. "A girl? What's she doing here at this hour?" Marco hesitated. "She's alone, barefoot. Must be 6, maybe 7. Says her name's Sophia." That name, soft, innocent, stirred something strange in Leonardo's chest. He hadn't heard a child's voice in this house for years. Not since his own daughter, Isabella, had been sent away to boarding school for her safety. "Bring her in," Leonardo said finally, standing up. His voice was calm, but his curiosity was sharp. When the doors opened, a gust of cold air swept in, and with it, a small figure. Sophia, wrapped in an oversized jacket, her hair tangled and cheeks flushed red from the wind, clutched the edge of her torn sleeve. Her shoes were missing. The bodyguards, men twice her size and armed to the teeth, watched as she walked timidly across the grand marble floor. Her big brown eyes darted between the strangers, then locked onto Leonardo, who towered behind his oak desk. He expected fear. But she didn't flinch. "Are you Mr. Moretti?" she asked, her voice trembling but brave. Leonardo blinked, a flicker of amusement crossing his face. "Who told you that name, little one?" Sophia looked down, her small fingers clutching the hem of her jacket. "Everyone on the street knows. You help people who can't go to the police." Marco glanced at Leonardo, surprised. It was true, though few would dare to admit it aloud. Leonardo was known not just as a mafia boss, but as Il Giudice, the judge. He punished those the law ignored, ruthlessly. "And what makes you think I'd help you?" Leonardo asked, his tone neutral. Sophia took a deep breath, her eyes glistening. "Because my mama, she said your name before she fell. She said, 'Go to Mr. Moretti, tell him they found us.'" Leonardo's eyes darkened. "They found us." Something shifted in the air. Marco stiffened. "Who found you?" Leonardo asked carefully, his voice now lower. Sophia hesitated. "The men with snake tattoos. They came last night. They hit Mama. She told me to run. Said to find you before it's too late. Leonardo exchanged a grave look with Marco. The snake tattoos, that wasn't random. That was the Viscari family, a rival syndicate that had been encroaching on his territory for months. He knelt down so his eyes met Sophia's level. What's your mama's name, Bambina? Clara Romano. Leonardo froze. The name struck him like a thunderclap. Clara Romano, a name buried deep in his past. A woman he had once loved, years before the criminal empire consumed him, the one who had left without a word, to escape the darkness of his world. For a long moment, Leonardo said nothing. Then he straightened slowly, his voice quieter, heavier. Marco, get the car ready. Now. Marco hesitated. Boss, it could be a trap. Now! The word cracked like a whip. Within minutes, the convoy was on the road. 2 black SUVs slicing through the rain-slicked streets of Queens. Sophia sat beside Leonardo, wrapped in his jacket, staring out the window as the city lights flickered across her face. Where do you live, Sophia? Leonardo asked gently. Behind the bakery on 46th. In the small red house. Mama said we couldn't tell anyone. Leonardo nodded, his jaw tightening, hiding in plain sight, just like her mother used to. When they arrived, the neighborhood was silent. The street lamps flickered weakly, and the small red house stood crooked at the end of the lane. The front door hung slightly open. Leonardo gestured for Marco and 2 men to cover the perimeter. He entered the house first. The smell of blood and cheap perfume hit him instantly. Broken glass crunched under his shoes. In the dim light, he saw her. Clara, lying on the floor beside an overturned chair. Her face was pale, her lips split, her breath shallow but still there. Clara, her eyelids fluttered. For a moment she looked confused, then her gaze focused on him. Leo, she whispered. Her voice was fragile, but the familiarity in it shattered something inside him. He knelt beside her, pressing a hand to her cheek. Who did this to you? The Viscari. They found me. I thought I had more time. I didn't want her. Her voice broke. You shouldn't have come back, Leonardo said softly, pain flickering in his eyes. I had to, Clara whispered. She needed to know who her father is. Leonardo froze again. His heart stopped for a moment. What did you say? But Clara's eyes closed before she could answer. Marco rushed in. Boss, ambulance is on the way. Leonardo snapped his head toward him. No hospitals, not yet. We take her to Dr. Romano. Sophia clutched Leonardo's arm, tears spilling down her face. Please, don't let her die. Leonardo looked down at her, at the same brown eyes he'd fallen in love with years ago. And in that moment, the truth he'd ignored for years slammed into him like a freight train. This little girl wasn't just a stranger's child. She was his. Leonardo Moretti had always believed that nothing could shake him. Not death, not betrayal, not the endless parade of men who had tried and failed to kill him, but as he stared down at the unconscious woman on the blood-stained floor, and at the little girl clutching his sleeve, his composure began to fracture. The rain outside hammered against the broken windows, thunder rolling like a warning from the heavens. Marco hovered near the doorway, waiting for orders, his hand still resting on his gun. Boss, what do you want us to do with her? Leonardo didn't answer immediately. He brushed a strand of hair from Clara's bruised face, his fingers trembling slightly, something his men had never seen before. Get the car, he finally said, his voice low but steady. We take her to Dr. Romano. Now. Sophia clung to his hand, her small fingers cold and trembling. Leonardo looked down at her. His daughter. The thought hit him like a physical blow. For years, he'd accepted the emptiness in his life as a consequence of power, that a man who ruled with fear could never have a family. Yet here she was, a tiny reflection of a love he'd buried under business, blood, and regret. The convoy tore through the city at full speed, rain slashing across the windshield. In the back seat, Clara lay across Leonardo's lap, her breathing shallow but steady. Sophia sat beside her, her head against Leonardo's arm, tears still streaking down her face. Will she die? She asked softly. Leonardo glanced down at her, his jaw tightening. "No," he said. "Not while I'm alive." When they reached the private clinic hidden behind an old church in Brooklyn, Dr. Romano, an elderly man with sharp eyes and steady hands, was already waiting. He'd treated Leonardo's wounds more times than anyone could count. Bullet holes, knife cuts, and broken bones, but never anything like this. "She's lost a lot of blood," Romano murmured as they wheeled Clara inside. "I'll do what I can." Leonardo stood in the doorway, drenched from the rain, his dark suit clinging to his frame. He didn't move. He just watched, silent, as the doctor and his assistants worked. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. Sophia sat quietly beside him, her knees drawn to her chest. Leonardo removed his coat and wrapped it around her. She looked up at him with wide eyes. "Why are you helping us?" she whispered. Leonardo hesitated. "Because your mother once helped me," he said simply. And it was true. Years ago, before he became Il Giudice, Clara Romano had been a nurse, a kind, fearless woman who had tended to a wounded stranger in an alley without asking questions. That stranger had been Leonardo, bleeding from a gunshot wound after an ambush. She hadn't known who he was back then. Or maybe she had, and she chose to save him anyway. It was the first and last act of kindness he'd ever received without a price attached. The door creaked open. Dr. Romano emerged, removing his gloves. "She'll live," he said, sighing. "But she needs rest and protection. Whoever did this will come looking." Leonardo nodded. "Then they'll find hell waiting." He turned to Marco. "Double the guards around this building. No one gets in without my approval. No one." "Understood, boss." When the room cleared, Leonardo stepped closer to the bed. Clara's face was pale, her lips split, her body covered in bruises. He reached out, brushing his fingers against hers. Her eyelids fluttered open. "Leo," her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried years of unspoken words. "You shouldn't have come back," he said quietly. "I didn't have a choice," she breathed. "They were coming for her." Leonardo's gaze darkened. "Sophia, she's yours," Clara whispered. "I tried to keep her safe. Away from this life. Away from you. But the Vescari found out. They knew I once worked at your club. They thought she was your weakness." Leonardo's expression hardened, a storm brewing behind his eyes. "Then they just made their last mistake." Clara reached for his hand, her fingers trembling. "Don't do this out of anger. Please. Promise me you'll protect her, not turn this into another war." Leonardo looked down at her, silent. He didn't make promises, not to anyone, but when his gaze shifted to the little girl sleeping in the corner chair, something inside him softened. "I'll protect her," he said at last. "I swear it." The next morning, the Moretti mansion awoke to chaos. Word had spread among his men. The boss had taken in a child. And not just any child. His. Inside the dining hall, Leonardo sat at the head of the long table, his eyes fixed on a glass of untouched whiskey. Marco stood at his right, reviewing intel. "The Vescari crew that hit Clara's place. They operate out of the docks. I've got eyes on their lieutenants. You give the word, and they disappear." Leonardo was silent for a long moment. Then, "No, not yet." Marco frowned. "Boss, with all due respect, they came after your family." Leonardo's gaze lifted slowly. "And that's exactly why I'll make them regret it properly. No gunfire, no headlines. I want them to bleed from the inside out. Business first, then loyalty, then power." Marco smirked faintly. "The judge's way," Leonardo nodded once. "We start tonight." Meanwhile, Sophia wandered the halls of the mansion, her small footsteps echoing on marble. Everything felt too big, too quiet, too strange. The guards nodded respectfully as she passed, unsure how to act around the child of their ruthless boss. She found herself standing before a room with the door slightly open, filled with old toys, dusty picture frames, and a small bed covered in pink sheets. It had belonged to Isabella Moretti, Leonardo's first daughter, the one he had sent away after her mother's death. When Leonardo walked in behind her, he froze for a moment. It felt like seeing ghosts. Who was she? Sophia asked softly. My daughter, Leonardo said, his voice almost breaking. She's about your age now. Sophia turned to him, her big brown eyes filled with empathy that no child should have had to learn. Do you miss her? Leonardo crouched down, meeting her gaze. Every day. Then maybe God sent me so you're not alone anymore, Sophia said with the simple honesty only a child could possess. Leonardo smiled faintly, a small, rare thing. Maybe he did. That night, as Clara slept under Dr. Romano's care, Leonardo returned to his office. The city skyline glittered beyond the window, indifferent to the violence simmering below. Marco entered, carrying a file. You'll want to see this. Inside were surveillance photos. The Vescari lieutenants, the docks, shipments, and coded messages intercepted between them. But one picture made Leonardo's blood run cold. It was of a man shaking hands with Rafael Conti, one of Vescari's captains. The man in the photo was Victor Rossi, Leonardo's own lieutenant. Betrayal. Leonardo's grip tightened on the photo until it crumpled. How long has he been feeding them? A few months, maybe longer. Looks like he gave them Clara's address. The room went silent. The only sound was the faint ticking of the old clock. Find him, Leonardo said quietly. Bring him here, alive. An hour later, Victor was dragged into the study, beaten, bloodied, still smirking. Boss, he rasped. I was just... Leonardo's fist crashed into his face before he could finish. You betrayed me, Leonardo said, his voice dangerously calm. You sold out a woman and a child to my enemies. Victor spat blood on the floor. She wasn't just any woman, was she? She was your... Another punch silenced him. Do you know what happens to men who touch my family? Leonardo asked. Victor laughed weakly. Family? You think you're a father now? You're a killer in a suit. That girl's better off without you. Leonardo stared at him, not with rage, but with something colder. You're right, he said softly. But that girl will never feel what you just said. He turned to Marco. Make him disappear. Quietly. As Marco dragged Victor away, Leonardo stood by the window again. Outside, lightning flashed, and for the first time in years, he felt something deeper than vengeance. Fear, not for himself, but for Sophia and Clara. Days passed. Clara slowly recovered under Dr. Romano's care. She woke to find Leonardo always nearby, reading reports, making calls, or quietly watching Sophia draw in her coloring book. Why are you still here? She asked one morning. Leonardo looked up. Because the people who hurt you aren't done yet. Clara shook her head. You don't have to do this. You don't owe me anything. He leaned forward, his gaze steady. I owe you everything. You saved my life once, and you gave me another without even telling me. Her eyes softened. You were dangerous, Leo. I couldn't raise her in that world. And yet the world found you anyway, he said quietly. Clara sighed. What happens now? Leonardo stood, adjusting his jacket. Now, I finish what they started. That night, Leonardo met his men at the docks. Silent, focused, deadly. The storm had returned, the rain masking their movements. He watched as the Vescari warehouse loomed ahead, lights flickering. Inside, men were laughing, drinking, unaware that the judge had arrived. Leave no one breathing, Leonardo ordered. What followed was swift and merciless, a storm of retribution. By the time the thunder stopped, the docks were silent. Leonardo stood amid the wreckage, rain washing the blood from his hands. For years, this kind of night had defined him, but now, as he looked out over the dark water, all he could think about was the little girl asleep in his house, the one who still thought he was a hero. He wasn't sure he deserved that. When he returned home just before dawn, Sophia was asleep on the couch, clutching one of his old ties like a blanket. Clara was awake, sitting quietly nearby. You went after them, she said softly. Leonardo didn't deny it. It's done. Clara studied him for a moment. You can't kill your way out of the past, Leo. Maybe not, he said, but I can make sure it never touches her again. He turned to leave. but Clara stopped him with a whisper. "She has your eyes." Leonardo looked back, and for the first time in years there was no anger, no pride. "Just truth. I know," he said quietly, "and that's why I can't fail her." The night was quieter than it should have been. The kind of quiet that never lasted long in Leonardo Moretti's world. Clara and Sophia had been moved to the safe house, a secluded villa outside the city, hidden behind vineyards and high iron gates. Leonardo had doubled the guards, installed cameras, and even slept on the couch outside their room, but deep down he knew peace was never permanent. Not in his life. Not in this world. At dawn, the first sign came. Marco's voice cut through the radio, tense, urgent. "Boss, we've got movement. Black SUVs, no plates. 6 of them, headed straight for the villa." Leonardo's blood ran cold. "How long?" 5 minutes. Maybe less." Leonardo's jaw clenched. "Get every man ready. No one gets past that gate." He turned toward the hallway, where Sophia had just appeared, rubbing her eyes, holding a teddy bear almost as big as her. "Leo," she murmured sleepily. He froze. No one had ever called him that in years, not since Clara. The innocence in that voice cracked the steel in his chest. He knelt down, brushing Sophia's hair back. "Go to your mama. Stay in the bedroom. Don't come out until I say," Sophia frowned. "Are the bad men coming again?" Leonardo's throat tightened. "Not this time," he said softly. "This time, they picked the wrong house." He kissed her forehead, something he hadn't done to anyone in decades. Then stood, his voice sharp as glass. "Marco, positions." Within minutes, the villa was surrounded. Rain began to fall again, slow at first, then heavy, a storm breaking over the vineyard. Headlights cut through the mist as the black SUVs stopped just beyond the front gate. From the first car stepped Vincenzo Viscari, the youngest and most violent of the Viscari brothers. Tall, smirking and reckless. "Leonardo Moretti," he shouted, his voice echoing through the storm. "You have something that belongs to us." Leonardo stepped onto the balcony, his long black coat whipping in the wind. His men flanked him on both sides, rifles ready. "I have nothing that belongs to cowards," he replied coldly. "Leave now, and I'll forget this ever happened." Viscari laughed, spreading his arms. "You think you can hide her forever? The girl, she's ours now. The moment her mother ran from us, she signed her fate." Leonardo's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped lower, deadlier. "You made one mistake, Vincenzo." Viscari tilted his head. "And what's that?" "You hurt my family." The gunfire began before the words finished leaving his mouth. The front gate exploded under the impact of bullets. Men shouted, ducking for cover. The air filled with the deafening roar of weapons and thunder. Leonardo moved like a man born for chaos, precise, merciless, controlled. His world had always been made of violence, but tonight it had purpose. A purpose with brown eyes and a teddy bear upstairs. Marco fought beside him, shouting orders through the storm. "They're flanking left. Hold them!" Leonardo barked, switching to his pistol, picking off 2 men advancing through the vineyard. For every Vescari soldier that fell, 2 more seemed to appear, crawling through the mud, relentless. Inside the villa, Clara had barricaded the bedroom door, pressing Sophia close. The child trembled against her. "Mama, I'm scared." Clara held her tight, whispering, "Your father will protect us." It was the first time she had ever called him that aloud. Outside, the battle raged. Leonardo's men were trained, disciplined, but the Viscari had come prepared. Grenades tore through the garden, shattering windows. The air filled with smoke and screams. Then Marco's voice, strained. "Boss, they've breached the west side." Leonardo spun, fury flashing in his eyes. "Fall back inside! Protect the second floor." He ran through the hallways of the villa, firing as he went, his coat soaked and torn. Bullet holes splintered the walls. The house that had once been silent and warm was now a war zone. When he reached the staircase, he saw him, Vincenzo Viscari, stepping through the broken door, gun raised, smirk cruel. "So this is where you hide your pretty family, huh, Judge?" Leonardo didn't speak. He fired. Viscari dove behind the marble column as bullets shattered a chandelier above. The two men circled like predators. "You think you're still untouchable?" Vescari taunted. "You've gone soft, Moretti. All it took was a woman and a kid." Leonardo's jaw tightened. "That woman and child will live." "You won't!" He lunged forward. The gunfight turned into a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. The two men crashed into furniture, trading blows that echoed through the halls. Leonardo's years of control finally snapped. Every punch was fueled by rage, guilt, and love twisted into fury. "You came to my house," Leonardo growled, slamming Vescari against the wall. "You hurt her. You made my daughter cry." Vescari spat blood, sneering. "Daughter? You think that little brat will ever love a killer?" Leonardo's fist connected one last time, and Vescari went limp. Leonardo stood over him, chest heaving, blood mixing with rain and sweat. It was over. But the house was still burning with chaos, fires starting from explosions, smoke filling the air. "Marco!" Leonardo shouted. "Get them out!" He ran upstairs through the haze, his lungs burning. The bedroom door was still locked. He kicked it open. Clara and Sophia huddled together near the bed. Clara's face was streaked with tears, but when she saw him, relief flooded her expression. "Leo!" He crossed the room, pulling them both close. The walls trembled from another explosion downstairs. "We're leaving," he said. "Is it over?" Clara asked. Leonardo looked down at her, his hand resting on the back of Sophia's head. "Almost." They escaped through the back corridor, smoke curling through the hallways like a living thing. Marco and two guards cleared the way, covering them as the roof began to cave. By the time they reached the outside courtyard, the villa was half engulfed in flames. Rain hissed against the fire, creating steam that glowed orange and red. Sophia turned back once, eyes wide, as the only home she'd known for days burned to the ground. Leonardo lifted her into his arms. "Don't look back," he said softly. "We'll build something better." Clara leaned against him, weak but alive. For the first time, Leonardo felt something stronger than vengeance. Something purer. Responsibility. Hours later, they sat in the safe house basement in Brooklyn, the one Leonardo had once used as a meeting place for his most dangerous operations. Tonight, it was quiet again. Sophia was asleep on a couch, clutching her bear. Marco stood near the door, bandaged but alive. "She's safe now," Marco said. "We wiped the rest of the Vescari crew." "They're finished," Leonardo nodded slowly. "Good." Marco hesitated, then added, "What happens now, boss?" Leonardo looked at the sleeping girl, the small, peaceful rise and fall of her chest. Then at Clara, sitting nearby, her eyes meeting his. "Now," he said quietly, "we stop being what we were." Marco frowned. "Meaning?" "I built this empire to control fear," Leonardo said, "but it only made me a prisoner of it. From today, no more blood, no more lies. If I have to burn the Moretti name to protect her, I will." Marco was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. "Then I'm with you, boss." Leonardo managed a faint smile. "No, you're with the man I'm trying to become." He walked to the couch and knelt beside Sophia, brushing her hair gently. When Clara spoke, her voice was quiet. "You really mean it, don't you? You'd walk away from everything." Leonardo looked at her, and for once his eyes weren't cold. "For her? I already have." As dawn broke, the first light crept through the window, falling across Sophia's sleeping face. Outside, the city was waking up, unaware that one of its most feared men had just chosen a different kind of war. The kind fought not with bullets, but with redemption. And as Leonardo Moretti stood there, watching the woman he'd loved, and the daughter he'd just found, he realized that for the first time in decades, he wasn't just surviving, he was finally living. The night the ambulance took Clara away, Leonardo stood in the rain, motionless. His black coat was soaked through, his jaw clenched as he watched the doors close. Inside that vehicle was the only woman who had dared to look at him not with fear, not with greed, but with recognition. She had seen something buried deep in him that even he had long forgotten. Humanity. At the hospital, the corridors smelled of antiseptic and desperation. Leonardo sat outside the emergency room for hours, his large hands clasped together. The same hands that had once ordered violence now trembling with helplessness. Sophia slept curled up against him, her tiny hand gripping his sleeve. Every time a doctor passed by, Leonardo's head jerked up, but no one stopped. When the surgeon finally approached, Leonardo stood instantly. "Tell me she'll live," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the hallway. The doctor hesitated, recognizing the man's name from somewhere. Perhaps the newspapers, or the whispers among police. "She lost a lot of blood, but she's strong," the doctor finally said. "She needs rest, care, and a reason to fight." Leonardo exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, he felt something break, not in anger, but in relief. He looked down at Sophia, who had woken and was staring up at him. "See?" he whispered, kneeling. "Your mama's a fighter, just like you." By morning, the world of the underworld was buzzing. The judge, Leonardo Moretti, had gone silent. The men who had attacked Clara were found within 24 hours. Not dead, but publicly ruined. Their accounts frozen. Their businesses stripped bare. Their names handed to the police with evidence so thorough that no lawyer could save them. Leonardo didn't lift a gun or give a bloody order. He simply made calls. Power didn't need violence when it was absolute, yet he felt no satisfaction, only a hollow ache. He realized that for the first time in his life, he had used his influence not to destroy, but to protect. And it felt right. 2 weeks later, Clara opened her eyes. The hospital room was quiet, sunlight filtering through the blinds. Her body ached, but her first instinct was to turn her head. And there she saw them. Sophia, drawing with crayons at the foot of the bed. And Leonardo, asleep in a chair, still in the same clothes, his face unshaven, his posture guarded even in exhaustion. When she stirred, Sophia squealed, "Mama!" and leapt into her arms. The noise woke Leonardo instantly. He stood, his composure returning like armor being strapped on. "You're awake?" he said quietly. Clara's voice was hoarse. "You stayed?" "I couldn't leave," he said. Then softer, "You saved my son once. I owed you more than a debt." Her eyes softened. "And yet, I think you stayed for more than that." Leonardo said nothing. But when Sophia hugged him too, he didn't resist. He just closed his eyes and let the moment breathe. When Clara was released, Leonardo arranged a small cottage on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't one of his estates. It was peaceful, surrounded by trees, a place where no one knew his name. He would visit often, always with groceries, sometimes with small gifts for Sophia, a new book, a tiny bracelet, a box of paints. One afternoon, Clara asked, "Why do you keep coming back, Leonardo?" He didn't answer at first. Then he looked at her, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. "Because you remind me that I can still be someone my son would be proud of." That night, Clara watched him leave and realized that the man she once feared as a monster was slowly learning how to be human again. Weeks turned into months. One day, as Leonardo was helping Sophia with her reading, she looked up at him and said innocently, "Are you my papa now?" The question hit harder than any bullet. Leonardo froze, staring at her small, hopeful face. Clara, standing in the doorway, whispered, "Sophia." But Leonardo smiled faintly, his voice trembling for the first time in years. "I don't know if I deserve that, Piccola, but if you want me to be, I'll try." And from that day, Sophia called him Papa Leo. Of course, the world Leonardo had built didn't let go easily. Rumors spread that the judge had gone soft. Rivals began circling, smelling weakness. One night, his trusted lieutenant Marco confronted him. "You can't walk away from this life." "Boss, it doesn't forgive." Leonardo looked out over the city skyline. "Then I'll make it forgive." Within months, he began dismantling everything, selling businesses, cutting off criminal ties, investing in legal ventures. He used his power not to dominate, but to repair, funding orphanages, women's shelters, and schools under anonymous donations. The newspapers called it the Marino Foundation. No one knew the man behind it, but Clara did. A year later, the cottage was alive with laughter. Sophia ran around the garden while Clara prepared dinner. Leonardo stood by the window, watching them, a faint smile playing on his lips. He still had scars, not the kind that showed, but the kind that whispered reminders of the man he used to be. When Clara approached and slipped her hand into his, he turned to her. "You did it," she said softly. "You changed everything." "No," he replied. "You did. I just finally listened." They stood there, framed by the sunset. Two souls who had found each other in the ruins of violence and turned it into a home. Months later, a newspaper headline caught the city's attention. Former crime empire collapses as anonymous donor funds massive charity network. In a quiet home outside Naples, a little girl placed fresh flowers on the windowsill and shouted, "Dinner's ready, Papa Leo!" And somewhere deep down, the man once feared as the judge whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. Not to God, but to a woman and a child who had saved his soul. That's the story of Clara, Sophia, and Leonardo Marino, a woman who opened her door to tragedy and ended up healing a broken empire. Their story reminds us that kindness doesn't always come from saints. Sometimes it's born in the hearts of those who've done wrong and finally seek to make it right. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more true life-inspired tales of love, redemption, and unexpected humanity. Because sometimes, even the most dangerous men carry the gentlest hearts.